While I was deployed, my mother forged my signature and sold my grandfather's cabin for $1.2 million to bail out my brother's crumbling fraud empire, but Grandpa had already left me the land surrounding it. The construction worker didn't even look up when I pulled into the gravel lot. He was eating a breakfast sandwich, leaning against a truck that said Blackthorn Development Group on the door in clean gold lettering. Behind him, a bulldozer sat idle next to a surveyor's stake with a little orange flag. Behind that, where my grandfather's cabin used to sit, where the wood stove still had a crack in the left panel that Grandpa said he'd fix every single summer and never did, there was a white metal sign, fresh enough that the morning dew hadn't dulled its shine. Blackthorn Ridge Estates, luxury mountain living starting mid-900s. I stood in the wet gravel in my civilian clothes, jeans, worn boots, a jacket that still had a tiny U.S. Army patch on the left sleeve because I'd been too jet-lagged to change, and I read that sign 3 times. The worker finally looked up. "Ma'am, this is an active development zone. You're going to need to... This land belongs to my family." My voice came out steadier than I felt. Every part of my body had gone cold in a way that had nothing to do with the mountain air. He put down his sandwich, picked up a clipboard, scanned down a page with the casual boredom of a man who'd answered this same question before. "You Audrey Sterling?" The gravel shifted under my boots. "They told us you were overseas." I looked at him for a long moment. I looked at the sign. I looked at the bulldozer, which was parked about 40 feet from where Grandpa's front porch used to be, where he'd sat in a wooden rocker every single evening I'd ever visited, drinking coffee that was too strong and watching the tree line like it owed him something. "Yeah," I said quietly. "They would say that." I took out my phone, started photographing. Every permit number on every stake, every truck logo, every corner marker, the sign itself, close and wide, the construction company contact number, the county permit sticker on the equipment. When I'd gotten everything I needed, I walked back to my rental car without another word. He didn't try to stop me. I drove 2 miles down the mountain road and pulled into a diner that still had a handwritten specials board and ordered the largest coffee they sold, and I opened the county property records database on my laptop with hands that wouldn't quite hold steady. Let me back up. My name is Audrey Sterling. I'm 34 years old. Until 8 months ago, I was a staff sergeant in the United States Army, military intelligence, 9 years of service, 2 deployments, one of them to South Korea, where I spent 14 months doing work I still can't talk about in detail at a listening post outside Osan. I am not, by any measure, easy to fool. And yet, my grandfather, Raymond Sterling, built the cabin on Blackthorn Ridge by hand in 1974. He and 2 of his friends, one a carpenter, one a mason, spent 3 summers cutting timber, pouring the foundation, and raising walls on 40 acres of land he'd saved for 11 years to buy. By the time I was born, it had been in the family for 20 years. By the time I was old enough to remember it, it was the closest thing to sacred ground I'd ever known. He taught me to read a topographic map on that property, took me through every corner of those 40 acres before I was 12, made me learn the watershed lines and the survey pins and the utility easements the way other kids learn the names of streets in their neighborhood. Land is memory, he told me once, and memory is the only thing they can't tax. He died when I was 25, 3 months into my first deployment. I didn't get to come home for the funeral. His will was read without me. I received a copy by email. My mother Vivian, my older brother Preston, and I were the 3 beneficiaries. My mother got the family home in Carrington. Preston got the investment accounts. I got the cabin and the surrounding land, 40 acres total, surveyed in 1992, and replatted in 2018 after a boundary dispute that, as it turned out, had been specifically triggered by something Preston had done. But I'll get to that. The point is, I trusted that property was mine. It was in writing. It had been in writing for years. And when you're 14 months into a deployment, living inside a security perimeter in a country where your phone calls are monitored and your mail takes 3 weeks and you're working 70-hour weeks on intelligence analysis that could affect real lives, you don't spend a lot of time worrying about county property records back home. That was my mistake. The only one I made, but it was enough. The county records database loaded at 7:43 a.m. in a corner booth with a cup of coffee cooling in front of me. I searched my name first, then the parcel number I'd memorized when I was 16 because Grandpa made me. The transfer was dated September 12th of the previous year, 14 months ago. I'd been in South Korea for 11 of those months. Power of attorney filed electronically, authorizing Vivian Marie Sterling to act on behalf of Audrey Catherine Sterling in all matters pertaining to the sale and transfer of the property, commonly known as Parcel 0047A, Blackthorn Ridge. The signature on the electronic filing was mine, not close to mine. Mine. I know my own signature in the way you know your own face. I've signed thousands of military documents. My handwriting has specific quirks from 2 fractured fingers I got during a hand-to-hand drill at Fort Benning in 2013. The ring and middle fingers on my left hand, which healed slightly crooked and created a specific pressure break about 2/3 of the way through the word Sterling. The A in Audrey has an angled loop that my drill sergeant used to mock. Both of those things were in the signature on that filing. Whoever forged it hadn't used a template. They'd used real documents. Original documents. The kind that only exist in one place. My stomach didn't drop. It went still in a way that was worse. The stillness of a person whose training just kicked in and overrode the part of their brain that wanted to scream. I kept reading. 7 days after the power of attorney was filed, $247,180 wired to an account held by by something called the Sterling Family Holdings Trust, an entity I had never heard of, never signed paperwork to create, and was not named in as a beneficiary. 3 days after that, $842,000 transferred from the Sterling Family Holdings Trust directly to Preston Sterling Custom Homes LLC. I pulled Preston's business filings, 3 civil lawsuits filed in the preceding 2 years, 2 contractor liens totaling over $400,000, 1 pending investigation by the State Insurance Commission for a claim he'd filed after a fire at one of his spec home builds, a fire that 2 of his subcontractors had apparently told investigators started in an area of the house that had been locked and inaccessible to the work crew. I sat there for a long time. The coffee got cold. My mother hadn't made a desperate mistake. She'd built a system. I drove to Carrington that same day and checked into a motel off Route 9 that charged $89 a night and had a broken ice machine and curtains that didn't fully close. I didn't care. I needed a table, a Wi-Fi connection, and walls I controlled. The first call I made was to my former Army JAG contact, Captain, now civilian attorney, David Reyes, who'd helped me update my own will before my second deployment, and who I trusted the way you trust someone who has seen you under pressure and didn't flinch. David, I need to know if I can file a criminal fraud complaint and a civil injunction simultaneously, and I need to know it before I talk to anyone in my family. There was a pause. Tell me everything. I did. All of it. In chronological order, with timestamps, because that's how I'm wired. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I've always appreciated about him. When I finished, he said, "The forged POA is felony fraud. The wire transfer makes it federal. The fact that it moved through a business entity she controls makes it money laundering. Audrey, this isn't a civil dispute. This is criminal. I know. Do you want to report it or do you want to handle this quietly?" I thought about my grandfather's hands rough as bark, pressing survey maps into mine and saying, "Your mother only understands land when someone wealthier wants it. I want to handle it correctly," I said, which means I want to understand everything I own before I talk to a single person. Smart, he said. Start with the survey. I unzipped the fireproof document sleeve the night before I'd left for my first deployment. Grandpa had pressed it into my hands at the airport, this battered gray zipper case about the size of a legal folder, and said, "Don't open this until you need it." He'd paused, then added, "Your mother only understands land when someone wealthier wants it. I've tried to plan for that." I'd kept it in a storage unit in Augusta, Georgia for 9 years without opening it. I'd moved it twice without opening it. I'd thought about it once during the deployment, when I was missing home badly enough that it hurt to breathe, but I didn't open it then either. I opened it that night in the motel room with the broken ice machine. Inside, the original 1992 survey maps, hand-drawn and professionally stamped. A letter from Grandpa's attorney, a man named Harold Birch, now deceased, explaining the 2018 replatting and the separate title transfers. And a handwritten note from Grandpa himself, 2 pages in his slanted, deliberate handwriting, dated 4 months before he died. "Audrey, in 2017, your brother Preston leased logging rights on the northeast quarter of the property to a man named Carl Dewick without asking or notifying me. I discovered this when Dewick's equipment showed up at the gate. Dewick was later arrested for tax fraud. The incident made certain things clear to me about the future. I have had Harold replat the property into 2 legal parcels. The cabin sits on 0.47 acres, parcel 0047A. Everything else, the remaining 15.3 acres, including the watershed land, the utility easements, the private access road that crosses Miller's Run, and the well rights, has been transferred separately, titled only to you, re-recorded with the county as parcel 0047B through 0047F. These are not part of the same parcel as the cabin. They were transferred to you personally in 2018, separate from the will and not subject to any later changes. Without those parcels, the cabin has no road access, no utilities, and no legal water rights. It cannot be reached, developed, sold to a developer, or demolished without your permission. I love you. I built defenses. Use them. Raymond. I sat on the edge of the motel bed for a long time with that letter in my hands. Then I laughed. Once, quietly. I'd been gone 14 months. My mother had spent what I now estimated was the better part of a year constructing the fraud. She'd hired someone to produce a convincing forged signature. She'd created a shell trust. She'd moved nearly $1 million to my brother's failing company. She'd sold the cabin. She had never, not once, checked what surrounded it. 15 acres of watershed land, easements, and road rights, all titled solely to me, that she didn't know existed, that made the parcel she'd just sold to a luxury development company worth exactly nothing without my cooperation. Blackthorn Development had paid $1.2 million for a decorative rectangle trapped inside my property. I opened my laptop and started drafting the injunction. I had 2 parallel tracks running simultaneously after that, and keeping them separate required the kind of sustained mental discipline I hadn't used since my last real intelligence assignment. Track 1, the criminal case. I met with David Reyes in person 3 days later at his office in Albany. A second-floor walk-up with law books that actually looked red, and a paralegal named Joan who'd been there 22 years and had the organizational instincts of a military logistics officer. The forgery alone is 10 years, David told me, spreading the county filing printout across his desk next to the signature exemplars I'd pulled from my own military records. The wire transfer makes it federal wire fraud. The shell trust is potentially a criminal conspiracy charge depending on who else was involved in setting it up. My brother received most of the money. Does he know where it came came from? That, I said, is what I need to find out. David filed a fraud complaint with the Albany County DA's office on my behalf. The intake was handled by an assistant DA named Marcus Webb, 31 years old, sharp, the kind of person who immediately saw the architecture of a case and started building it in his head. He assigned an investigator from the Financial Crimes Unit, Detective Renata Okafor, who had 14 years on the force and had worked 3 major mortgage fraud cases in the previous decade. Detective Okafor called me 2 days after David filed. Ms. Sterling, she said, I've reviewed the initial documentation. The signature comparison alone is enough for probable cause on the forgery count. I want to ask you, is there any possibility your mother had legitimate access to an original signed document from you? The only original signed documents I know of are stored in my own records and in the county recording system. There's one other possibility. I paused. My grandfather's estate attorney was Harold Birch. He died in 2020. His firm closed. His files would have been transferred to a successor firm or stored. I'll pull those records. Detective, whatever you find, I need the chain of custody to be clean. I don't want this dismissed on a procedural issue. She was quiet for a moment. Ms. Sterling, were you military? 9 years. I'm out now. Okay, she said. Then you already know what I'm about to say. Let me handle the chain of custody. You just make sure you don't do anything that contaminates the evidence before I get to it. Understood. Track 2 was the civil case, which was, in many ways, more immediately powerful. David filed the injunction with the state court on a Tuesday. Because the development was already active, equipment on site, permits issued, work commenced, we qualified for emergency relief. The judge was the Honorable Patricia Salazar, a 26-year veteran of the bench who had a reputation for reading every page of every filing and asking questions that made both sides uncomfortable. I was in that courtroom. Blackthorn Development's attorney, a man named Gregory Faust from a firm with 4 names on the letterhead, had clearly been told to treat this as a nuisance claim. He was flipping through documents at the table when I walked in. He glanced up once, dismissed me, and went back to his papers. I was wearing my Army Class A uniform, not for theatrics, because I'd earned it and because it communicated economically exactly what kind of person I was. Methodical, credentialed, and not here to waste anyone's time. I laid the stamped parcel records, the 1992 survey maps, the 2018 replatting documents, and the title transfers in front of the judge in a neat, organized package. Judge Salazar read every page. Gregory Faust stopped flipping his papers about 8 minutes in. Counsel, the judge said, looking at Faust over her reading glasses. Does your client have any documentation establishing legal access to this property? Long pause. We were provided assurances by the seller that I asked about documentation. Another pause. We're still reviewing. The judge looked at me. Ms. Sterling, the access road crossing Miller's Run. This has been titled solely in your name since 2018? Yes, Your Honor. The parcel replatting is on page 14. The individual title transfer is on page 17. She turned to the next page. And the utility easements? Pages 19 through 22, Your Honor. Water rights are on 23. She put the papers down. Looked at Faust. The emergency injunction is granted. All development activity on and adjacent to parcel 047A is halted pending a full hearing. Counsel, I would strongly advise your client to get very comfortable with the phrase, without legal access. I did not go to the Sunday dinner to confront anyone. I went because I needed to see their faces before they knew what was coming. My mother, Vivian Sterling, 61 years old, the kind of woman who could make "I'm so proud of you" sound like a threat, opened the door in a cream blazer and pearl earrings and hugged me with one arm the way she always had, the half hug that communicated affection while maintaining a certain deniability about its sincerity. You look thin, she said. Korea doesn't feed you properly. Preston was already inside, pouring wine into crystal glasses that caught the afternoon light. He was wearing a watch that I'd looked up the night before, a Breguet Classique, retail, $6,200. The company he'd used to buy it had $400,000 in outstanding contractor liens. He grinned at me over the back of the sofa. How's it feel to be stateside? You're going to love the market up here. Honestly, Audrey, if you ever want to sell that Blackthorn property, now is the time. Values up there are insane. My mother appeared in the kitchen doorway. Let's not bore her with property talk. Property talk. She'd reduced felony wire fraud to an awkward dinner topic. I smiled. No, it's interesting. Tell me more about the market up there. Preston launched into a 15-minute monologue about mountain real estate that I let wash over me while I ate roasted chicken and watched his hands, his watch, the easy confidence of a man who believed the accounting had been settled. My mother kept catching my eyes across the table with the particular warmth she deployed when she wanted to signal that everything was fine, everything was handled, no need to ask questions. She had no idea I'd been to the county records database. She had no idea I'd opened the document sleeve. She had no idea that Detective Okafor had already pulled the files from Harold Birch's successor firm and found a signed copy of my 2018 estate documents. Documents that had been accessed by someone the previous year, flagged in the firm's file management system as having been viewed and printed without a billing notation. She had no idea that David Reyes had already filed the criminal fraud complaint, that Marcus Webb at the DA's office had opened a formal investigation, or that Blackthorn Development's attorney had received a copy of the injunction that morning. I ate my chicken. I complimented the rosemary potatoes. I hugged my mother at the door when I left. It's good to have you home, she said. It's good to be here, I said, and I drove back to my motel. The meeting at Blackthorn Blackthorn's Albany headquarters was my idea. David had suggested handling everything through attorneys. I understood his reasoning. It was cleaner, less emotional, more legally controlled. But I had spent 9 years in military intelligence, and I had learned that there are moments when physical presence communicates things that paper cannot. I wore my Class A uniform. I carried the document case. I rode the elevator without asking permission. The conference room was on the 4th floor. Glass walls, mahogany table, the kind of room designed to make whoever sits on the far side feel the weight of institutional money. Marcus Thorne was at the head of the table, 60-ish, silver watch, the careful posture of a man who'd spent decades being the most important person in any room he entered. My mother was there, which I hadn't entirely expected. She was in the same cream blazer from Sunday dinner. She'd worn it like armor. Preston was beside her, without the wine this time, without the easy grin. He'd been told by someone, Blackthorn's legal team I assumed, that this was more serious than a nuisance filing. His leg was moving under the table. Thorne's lead attorney, a woman named Catherine Walsh, partner at Faust & Walsh, 20 years in real estate litigation, sat to his right with a legal pad and the expression of someone who had already partially figured out the problem. I placed the stamped injunction order in front of Thorne without a word. Catherine Walsh picked it up first. She read in silence. I watched her expression shift somewhere around page 2. Not alarm exactly, more like the particular stillness of someone recalculating a position they'd believed was solid. Thorne read it next. Then he looked at my mother. You told me ownership was clear. It is, she said immediately. The certainty in her voice was remarkable. 14 months of careful construction, and she still believed in it. I opened the document case. The 1992 survey maps hit the mahogany table with a weight that was partly physical and partly something else. The weight of a grandfather who'd spent 3 summers building something by hand and 50 years making sure it couldn't be taken. The access road crossing Miller's Run, I said, is mine. The utility easements are mine. The watershed rights are mine. I slid the title transfer documents forward. You own a structure with no lawful road, no utilities, and no water rights. Catherine Walsh cleared her throat. Mr. Thorne, development access is legally impossible without her cooperation. Thorne had stopped blinking. He looked at the maps. He looked at Catherine. Then he turned toward my mother with a slowness that had nothing casual about it. You sold me landlocked property. Before she could answer, I did. She sold you an island. The room was very quiet. My mother's face went through several things in rapid succession. Confusion first, genuine, reflexive, then understanding, arriving like a slow tide, then something I hadn't expected. Not shame, not fear, but a flash of something close to admiration. Like some part of her recognized the architecture of what her father had done and was, against her will, impressed by it. Then that was gone, and what was left was just the calculation. Audrey, her voice was very controlled. I think we should discuss this as a family before. The family discussion already happened, I said. At Sunday dinner. You called it property talk. Preston made a sound, something between a laugh and a word that didn't quite form. Preston, Catherine Walsh said quietly, I would strongly recommend you not say anything else in this room. He closed his mouth. Marcus Thorne looked at me across the mahogany table with the expression of a man who had just discovered that the sure thing he'd invested $1 million check in was a rectangle of mountain land without a road. What do you want? He said. It was a negotiating question. I'd expected it. The injunction stands until the criminal matter is resolved, I said. After that, we'll discuss your options regarding the property. Criminal matter, he repeated. The fraud complaint was filed 11 days ago with the Albany County DA's office. The Financial Crimes Unit has been investigating for 9 days. I'm told they've identified the source of the forged signature documents. I paused. I would suggest you have your own counsel independent of any Sterling family interests review your exposure before we have any further conversations. Catherine Walsh was already writing on her legal pad. Marcus Thorne stood up. He straightened his jacket. He looked at my mother one more time, a long, final look that communicated without a word that whatever arrangement they'd had was over. Then he walked out. The criminal case took 7 months. Detective Renata Okafor, 14 years in financial crimes, the kind of investigator who built cases the way engineers build bridges, carefully and without shortcuts, traced the forged signature to a paralegal who had worked at Harold Birch's successor firm and had been paid $8,000 in cash to access my original estate documents and photograph them. The paralegal had a prior relationship with my mother going back 12 years. She cooperated with investigators in exchange for a reduced charge. My mother was arrested on a Tuesday in November, charged with forgery in the first degree, wire fraud, and criminal conspiracy. Preston was charged as a co-conspirator for knowingly accepting funds derived from fraudulent activity, a charge that his own financial records subpoenaed as part of the investigation made impossible to dispute. The insurance fraud investigation that had been pending against Preston's company was reopened in light of the new evidence. That case is still ongoing as of this recording. My mother's attorney, not Preston's attorney, not the family attorney, but her own separate counsel whom she had to hire with her own money because the Sterling Family Holdings Trust had been frozen by court order, negotiated a plea agreement. She pled guilty to forgery and wire fraud. She received 4 years of probation, mandatory restitution, and a condition that she have no contact with me for the duration of her probation without my written consent. She has not reached out. Preston's plea agreement was finalized 3 months later. He received 2 years of probation and was ordered to repay the full $842,000 $6,000. His LLC was dissolved by court order. The $6,000 watch, along with other assets purchased during the period in question, was seized. Marcus Thorne's attorneys and David Reyes negotiated a separate civil settlement regarding the landlocked parcel. Without access to the road and utilities, the land was worth approximately $40,000 as a standalone piece of property, a figure that looked impressive as a development site and catastrophic as a line item on a balance sheet next to a $1.2 million purchase price. Blackthorn Development took a significant loss. The luxury mountain housing development was quietly shelved. The land is mine, all of it. The cabin parcel and the 15 surrounding acres, the access road, the watershed, the utility easements, the well rights that my grandfather registered in 1974 and protected with the particular, patient stubbornness of a man who'd grown up during a time when land was the only thing that stayed. I went back to Blackthorn Ridge on a Saturday in April, 8 months after I'd stood in the wet gravel and read that sign. The surveyor's stakes were still in the ground. The development sign was gone. Pulled the week the injunction was granted. The bulldozer was gone. The cabin was still standing, which I hadn't been certain of. The window on the east side was broken. The porch steps needed replacing. The wood stove's cracked left panel was exactly where it had always been. I sat on the porch for a long time. I thought about my grandfather building this place. 3 summers. His hands and 2 friends' hands and whatever conviction it takes to believe that the thing you're making will outlast you. I thought about the quiet, careful way he'd replatted the land after Preston's logging stunt. Not angry, not dramatic, just methodical, the way he did everything. Closing doors my mother didn't know were open. Building defenses she'd never think to look for. He'd never told her about the separate parcels. She'd lived her entire adult life next to that land and never asked enough questions to find out what was underneath it. He'd known her, I thought. He'd loved her and known her, which is a specific, difficult combination, and he'd planned accordingly. I pulled out his letter, the 2 pages in his slanted handwriting, soft now at the folds, and read it again. I built defenses, used them. I folded it carefully. I have spent a lot of time since all of this sitting with the question of what I feel about my mother. Not the legal facts of it. Those are settled or settling, but the human part. The part where she's still my mother, where I can still smell the roasted chicken and hear Frank Sinatra through the ceiling speakers and remember being 12 years old and thinking she was the most capable person I'd ever met. She is capable. That's precisely the problem. She looked at her father's land and saw a transaction. She looked at her daughter's signature and saw a tool. She looked at everything Grandpa built and calculated what it was worth and never once, I'm certain of this, genuinely certain, never once considered that there might be something underneath it she didn't know about. He'd planned for that too. The cabin took 6 weeks to make livable again. I did most of the work myself, replaced the porch steps, fixed the east window, reconditioned the wood stove, the cracked left panel I left alone, because some things you keep. I ran a new water line and updated the electrical to code and built a small desk in the corner where I could work, because I'd taken a position with a private intelligence consulting firm that let me work remotely. On the last evening of the renovation, I sat in a rocker on the porch, not Grandpa's original chair, which was long gone, but one I'd built myself from instructions I found in a woodworking book he'd left on the shelf, and I watched the tree line the way he used to. My phone buzzed. A text from David Reyes. Restitution payment schedule confirmed. First installment from Preston, April 30th. I put the phone down. The tree line was very still. Your mother only understands land when someone wealthier wants it. She'd wanted it. She'd built an entire system to get it. A forged signature, a shell trust, a paralegal bribed with cash. She'd moved fast while I was 14 months away, while she believed the property was hers to take. She'd gotten the cabin. She'd forgotten what surrounded it, and I'd gotten everything else.